All right. Good afternoon. So tomorrow night is Hanukkah, and we'll be talking about both Hanukkah and this week's parsha. This week's parsha is Parshas Vayeshev, and the Shalah writes that the three parshas, Vayeshev, Miketz, and Vayigash, which are this week, next week, and the week after, all have a connection to Hanukkah. These are the three parshas where Hanukkah will fall out in their time. So this year we have Hanukkah over the parshas of Vayeshev and Miketz. Sometimes it's Miketz and Vayigash. But this year we're going to be talking about Parshas Vayeshev. So this week's parsha has an interesting story where we have the Shvatim trying to kill their brother Yosef, and then eventually selling him. And so then eventually selling Yosef as a slave to Mitzrayim. And this is all in response to the fact that Yosef has these dreams about himself being the leader over his brothers, and then his father also shows some favoritism towards Yosef as a result of him being his mother Rachel's son, the favorite wife's son, and he makes him his special coat. So this results in like a sort of jealousy from the brothers, and eventually leads to them trying to get rid of him. And it's a very strange story. We're not really going to explain that story so much to try to understand it, because it is a little bit complicated, but we will explore one element of that story. But when it talks about, we have a bunch of sources today that we'll be looking at to reference for this class. So in this week's parsha, it talks about they're about to throw Yosef into a pit. Yosef comes to talk to his brothers, and his brothers gang up, and they get him, and they throw him into, they see there's a pit, and they throw him into the pit. So Vayikachehu, it says in the pasuk, they took him, V'yishlichu Isai Habara, and they threw him into the pit. V'habari in Baymayim. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And so all of the Mefarshim ask the question, if it says Habarik, that the pit was empty, then obviously there was no water in it. It seems redundant to say that there was no water in it. If it was empty, then there was no water in it. So the Gemara says this. Darash Rabbi Nassan bar Minyaynei Nishmei Rav Tanchumar. Rav Nassan bar Manyumi taught in the name of Rav Tanchum. My dechse v'habarik in Baymayim. What does it write? Why does it write that the pit was empty, there was no water? Mimash mashanemar v'habarik. Being that we know that the pit was empty, don't we already know that there was no water? But what does this teach us? There was no water in it, but there were snakes and scorpions in it. So when it was saying that it's empty, it is saying that it's empty specifically of water, but there were snakes and scorpions in the pit, which basically enhances the danger of him being thrown into the pit. So we're taught that the pit was empty and there was no water in it. And now the interesting thing is that this Gemara that we just read, source number 2, comes in the middle of a discussion about Hanukkah. In the Sugya, in Gemara about Hanukkah, which is in Masechah Shabbos, there's where they discuss all the details of Hanukkah. They suddenly bring this little piece. So the part before it is about Hanukkah, the part after it is about Hanukkah. And the reason the Gemara works this way is the Gemara kind of reads a little bit as a stream of consciousness, because the Gemara is the recordings basically of what went on in the Beis Medrash. And when you're learning with someone in real life, you say one thing, and sometimes one thing will lead to another that may not be completely related. The reason the Gemara brings this over here is because previously it's talking about something that Rav Nassan bar Manyumi taught in the name of Rav Tanchum. So the previous Gemara about Hanukkah was said by the same person. So they bring something else that he said at a completely different time about Habarik and Hanukkah. But we also know that this isn't just random, that this concept is stuck in middle of the story of Hanukkah and the halachas of Hanukkah. There must be a connection, like we said previously, there's a connection between this week's parsha and Hanukkah, and there must be a connection to this concept specifically, v'habarik ein baymayim. that the pit was empty and there was no water. To Hanukkah. And so we're going to discuss first what it means in this parsha, and then we'll see how it's also applicable to Hanukkah. So, when it says, so Rashi also brings this concept. Rashi quotes this Gemara, which is later quoted also by the Medrash. Rashi brings this concept that the snakes and scorpions were in there. There was no water, but there was snakes and scorpions. And it's explained that this is the reality. When we talk about Torah, Torah is compared to a bunch of different things. Torah is compared to a bunch of different Torahs, a life source. Torah is all, there's also different comparisons to Torah. And if you see in source number 3, it says, Ve'ein mayim ala Torah. One of the things that Torah is compared to is water. Shenamar havei kol tzamei l'chol l'mayim. As it says, all who are thirsty, go and drink the water. And what is that referring to? If you're thirsty for a relationship with Hashem, if you're thirsty to feel a godly presence in your life, go and drink the water, go and learn Torah. So the same way, there's many different comparisons to water. The same way water is necessary for survival, we'll say for a Jew, learning Torah is as essential for survival as water. Water is like the most essential thing for survival. As soon as there's no water, there's no survival. Similarly, water is satisfying. It quenches a certain thirst. Similarly, Torah is supposed to be satisfying. It's supposed to give us a certain deep satisfaction. And so when it says, Habar reik aim by mayim, that the pit was empty, there was no water, we can use this as an allegory, aim by mayim. That there was no water is that there was no Torah in this picture. That in this moment, the Shvatim moved away from Torah. They're throwing their brothers into the pit. That is an action that goes against Torah. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that it says, V'sartem, that you'll leave Hashem, V'avadatem elikim acherim. He says, as soon as you leave God, what happens? As soon as you turn your head away from Hashem, what happens? Automatically, you're serving idols. As soon as you turn away from Torah, automatically something comes to fill the void. Something negative comes to fill the void. So when a Jew takes himself away from Torah, automatically something negative comes in. And that's what it means when the Torah says, Ein by mayim. What is it telling us? There was no Torah. It's teaching us automatically. That's what we're able to learn from this. That, but there were snakes and scorpions in there. As soon as you turn away from the positive, it fills up with snakes and scorpions. In this case, snakes and scorpions don't literally mean snakes and scorpions, but it means all those like snakes and scorpions representing all those negative, creepy forces that are against godliness, right? I think snakes and scorpions is something that for most of us will cause a visceral, this is bad reaction. No one wants to meet a snake or a scorpion. Yeah, not something that you want to encounter. Right? It's an obvious symbol of something that's bad. So when we're saying that the bar was empty, that there was no water, it means that in this case, in this scenario, this concept of them selling Yosef, they turned away from Torah, and automatically something bad happened as a result because of them turning away from Torah. And even the Medrash says, if we see in the fourth source over here, and it continues on to the next page, I'll just read it in English. Rav Acha said the pit was empty. It says, Yaakov's pit was empty. This is a reference to Yaakov's sons. There was no water in it. There were in it no matters of Torah, which is likened to water. So it means that on some level, Yaakov's sons turned away from Torah. But that doesn't seem to make sense. When we talk about Yaakov and his sons, and his Shvatim, the concept that we talk about a lot is how holy the Shvatim were, and what a wonderful thing it was that Yaakov didn't have any bad sons, right? Avram had Yishmael. We spoke about this previously in the last few weeks. Avram has Yishmael. Yitzchak has Esav. Yaakov has Mitzvah Shlema, and he had a completely holy crew. All of his sons are holy. All of his sons are aligned with Torah. So how can we say that they turned away from Torah. And a very interesting thing is actually, if you read some of the Mefarshim around the story, the Sforno specifically talks about how the Shvatim, they actually held almost like a din Torah before they put Yosef into the pit. For some reason, it almost seems like as a result of the dreams that he had and all the favoritism that their father was showing, they almost became sort of paranoid. Either that he's actually going to come and kill them. They thought that maybe he was going to come and kill them in order to grab power over them. Or they thought maybe that on some sort of spiritual level, he was coming to destroy them in order to have the complete Yerusha from their father all for himself. So it was maybe driven by jealousy, maybe driven by paranoia. When he was coming to them, they thought he was coming to hurt them. And the Sforno says, if someone comes to kill you, you will go and kill him first. Yeah, but he obviously had some extra power. I think it does sound a little bit like it's a state of it's not such a rational thinking, or it's a spiritual reality, which is that he's sort of destroying them spiritually, and then he's going to receive the whole spiritual inheritance. Yeah, but it is strange. But yeah, so it even says, even later on, when the Shvatim are reunited are in Mitzrayim, and they're talking about, maybe it's because we sold our brother Yosef that we ended up in this situation. Remember, when they're reunited, they never say, because we threw him in or the pit or we sold him. They say it's because we ignored his cries for mercy. So they didn't think, still then, they believed in the validity of throwing him into the pit. Even later on, they decided, they made a choice according to Torah to kill him. And so therefore, what are they regretting? The fact that they ignored his cries. That's a separate sin, almost, from the original act that they did. But for the original act, they thought it was justified by Torah. So if they think it's justified by Torah, how can we say Bahabarik in Baymayim that there wasn't Torah present when we're talking about these extremely holy people, and they're even, according to their minds, they're acting according to Torah? So what does it mean that there was no Torah there, that it was lacking an element of godliness over here? So, like we said before, the Torah is compared to many different things. Torah can be like a candle, and one thing we said is Torah is like water. So one of the ways that Torah is like water is, it says that water flows from a high place to a lower place. That's the nature of water, is that it will always flow downwards, right? As opposed to, we talk about fire. Fire is always, where's its direction? Fire's direction is upward. Water is always flowing downwards. From the high place to the low place. So water has, when we talk about water, we're saying that water has a certain humility, that it's able to go into the lower place. It doesn't need to stay elevated. Water by nature is going to go into the lower realms. And so when we're talking about water being compared to Torah, we're emphasizing the element of bittul that is necessary before we start learning Torah. What does that mean? That bittul is necessary before we start learning Torah. We need to have a certain humility. We have to have a certain letting go of ourselves before we can start learning Torah. So let's explore this idea. Now, let's put Torah aside. In general, if you want to learn something new, and I think this might be maybe the source of a lot of the problems that are in the world right now. If you want to learn something new, you need to let go of yourself. As long as you are stuck in yourself and in your worldview and all of the information that you've attained until now, you're never going to be able to learn something that is new. You're going to hear something and you're going to distort it. As long as you're stuck in yourself, you're going to distort it to fit into your worldview. You're going to distort it to fit into all your preconceived notions. We see that happening a lot, right? Where people will take information and instead of taking it for what it is, it's part of the reason that let's say we have the world is so polarized because we can't take in the information objectively. We can't take in the information as what it is because we're not able to let go of ourselves and our preconceived notions. And this happens on all sides, where we hear something and we're not able to accept it with all of its nuance. We're not able to understand it with all of its nuance, with all of its complexity, because automatically we stick it into all of our preconceived notions. And that means that you've not actually discovered something new. In order to really learn something new, you need to have a certain sense of bittul. Humility is necessary before you can learn something new. I one time had a teacher who was teaching us, and he came in the first day, he taught a lesson that literally not a single one of us understood a word that he said. Not a word that he said. He made no sense. He was talking and we did not understand him at all. And then the next time he came, and we were like really not looking forward to his class the next week, because it's not so enjoyable to sit through something when you don't understand what's going on. And he comes, and especially it was like, I think what strengthened that was like, we were all very much in like a very like learning headspace where we were like intellectually driven and we wanted to learn, we wanted the information. And then he comes in and he's like, okay, makes no sense. What's going on over here? And then the next class came in and he gave like one of the best classes that we'd ever had that year. And we were like, wow, what just happened? And later on in here, he explained that he always starts off with something extremely out of the realms of what he knows is the capacities of the students that he's teaching. And the reason that he does that is to prepare us to have a certain sense of humility before we start to learn. Because if you're missing that humility, you're not going to actually be able to receive that new information. You're going to be too stuck in yourself. And so that was like a very strategic move on his part in teaching that kind of class. Obviously, you need to know that you have enough commitment from your crowd to be able to get away with that. But because if sometimes that will happen, everyone will just leave, right? But this was a setup where that could work, and it really, you could see that made a difference for us in creating a certain sense of openness and humility. And so, if this is true about learning, I think learning something new in general, it's even so much more true when it talks about when we come to the fact that we're learning Torah. When we're learning Torah, we're not just exploring intellectual ideas. We're not just enjoying stimulating our minds. A huge part of learning Torah is the fact that we are connecting with the giver of the Torah, that we are connecting with Hashem. And Hashem is completely unlimited. So through the action of Torah study, I'm able to learn and connect my mind to something that is completely and totally limitless. I'm able to understand things that I would never have been able to understand without this. I'm able to receive information that my mind on its own could never grasp. There's the potential in learning Torah for that to happen. To be able to connect your brain to the infinite, to be able to connect your finite brain to the infinite. But that is only going to happen if we approach it with a sense of bittul. If we approach it with humility and openness, and on a certain level, lowering ourselves to open up our minds to hear what Hashem has to say. Because my own mind is limited. My own mind is finite. So with the power of my own mind, I cannot grasp the infinite. It's only when I let go of myself that I'm able to grasp the infinite. And so more than any other study, for the study of Torah, we need to have this sense of bittul. It's a very interesting thing. We say it every day in Zirkind Shema, but it's actually the source for that is in Maseches Brachos. If you look at source number 5, it says, "V'nafshi ka'afar l'kol siya," and may my soul be like dust to all. Psach libi b'sarasecha, open my heart to your Torah. that seems to be such a random sentence that my heart should be like, let my soul be like dust and open my heart to Torah. They seem to be coming from two very different things. How is this sentence sort of connected? What's the connection between the first part of the sentence and the second part of the sentence? Is that a prerequisite to being able to learn not psach libi b'seira, but serasecha. Serasecha being your Torah, being Hashem's Torah. In order for us to be able to access the element of Torah that is godly, that is infinite, I need to preface that with v'nafshi kafar l'kaltia, with my soul being like dust, with a sense of humility, with the sense of being able to let go of myself and move outside of my own boundaries. And we see this concept actually represented even in halacha. It says, it's in source number 670, I'll read it inside, but in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, it discusses how. You know how you need to make a bracha before you speak any words of Torah. That's why in our daily brachas, we include the berachas Torah in our daily brachas, because as soon as you're going to speak words of Torah, that's an example of that would be Shema. Shema is words of Torah. So as soon as you're going to speak, before you can speak words of Torah, you need to say berachas Torah. You need to say the blessings on the Torah. So that's why we say brachas before Shema, so that we get our berachas Torah in. But if you think words of Torah, let's say you're one of those types of people, the night before you went to sleep, you were learning something good, and so when you wake up, the first thing you're thinking about is the thing that you were learning the night before. Do you need to be like, oh, hey, I can't think these words yet until I quickly say brachas? No, you can think as much as you want in your brain. You can say the words of, you can think the words of Torah as much as you want. It's only when you actually verbalize them with your mouth that you need to say the bracha. So let's think about what's the difference. For us, we might say, on some level, thought, being able to grasp the idea with your mind is higher than being able to say the words. My son is learning how to read. So we practice reading Hebrew by opening up a sefer and he's reading inside. When he's saying these words, does he understand anything that he's saying? No, he doesn't understand Hebrew yet. He's not at that level yet. He's just reading the words. To him, it's just word practice. He's just verbalizing the words. But guess what? There's a value to that. He would need to say berachas Torah before he can read the words from a chumash. Over understanding. And in our minds, we would say, oh, but understanding is so much more important. Anyone can say any words, but not anyone can understand. We're all equal in the ability. I mean, everyone who can speak, we shouldn't take that for granted. But anyone who can speak is equal in the ability to verbalize words, but we're not all equal in our ability to understand. There will be people who have a higher level of understanding and people who have a lower level of understanding. So you would think that there should be a superiority to understanding over speaking. And there will be other times when we'll emphasize the importance of understanding. But right now, we're emphasizing the importance of bittul in our Torah study. Speaking words represents the ultimate bittul in Torah study. Speaking words that you don't understand. Because it represents, I just recognize that there's a value in this because it comes from God. Even if I don't understand it, I'm still going to speak it. In order to be able to do that, you need to have a bittul. Our sense of self is like, no, I need to understand before I can do this. Right? It's sort of like a nasa v'nishma. We will do and then we'll understand. My sense of self says, no, I need to understand first. And as soon as we move into the realm of understanding, who is it about? It's about me. And it's going to go according to my understanding and according to my capabilities. But in just saying the word, I'm connecting to the giver of the Torah, even if it's without understanding. Not to say that you shouldn't then later go on and try to understand. But there's a value in that moment of understanding. And it says that before we receive the Torah, at Mar Sinai, what was the difference? There's a number of different differences that it discusses. How it says that the Avos learned the Torah, right? It says Yaakov went to yeshiva for many years, and the Shvatim, were learning Torah, and when they came down to Mitzrayim, they sent someone ahead to the Levi ahead to establish yeshivas even in Mitzrayim. So that means that the Jewish people were learning Torah even before Matan Torah on Shavuos, right? Like in the year 2448, they were learning Torah. So what happened at Matan Torah? What was the difference? And so he explains that the difference is, there's a few different places where it talks about the difference. One of the differences is that this value of just the words itself was elevated over understanding. Before they received the Torah, they were only able to understand the words, but they weren't connecting so deeply to Hashem himself, to the ability to just say the words. And it says that when you say the words, you have this ability not to forget your Torah study. If you just say it in your mind, you might forget. That's what it says in the Gemara, that if you just say it in your mind, you're going to forget your Torah study. If you want to be able to remember your Torah study, you have to say it verbally. Now, you might say that that's partly about how memory works, that when we verbalize things, we remember them better. But it's also connected to this idea that there's a certain connection that we have with Hashem himself when we actually verbalize it on a simple level, with the sense of bittul. And that's why it says in the Darim, source number 7, it says, initially, Moshe would study Torah and forget it. Until it was given to him as a gift. And he gave it to Moshe when he concluded speaking with him. So it was only when the Torah was given as a gift, which means that Hashem gave it as a piece of himself to us at Matan Torah, that we gain this ability that even without understanding, just through the power of speaking, just through the power of letting go of ourselves, we're able to connect with Hashem himself. And this is what was lacking for the Shvatim in this moment. Sorry. According to, now we said, how can it be? The Shvatim were holy people. So according to people of their level, at the level they were at, they should have had a stronger sense of humility. But they were lacking this humility. It says, Ein by Mayim, is that they were lacking this level of mind. They were lacking this level of humility. And it goes back to answer some of the questions that we posed when we said, well, how could it be that they did this to Yosef? And, one person, they think that one person is coming to kill 10 of them. When you're lacking humility and you're centering yourself, then that's what allows for that paranoia, right? That's what allows for you to go into the space of everyone's out to get me, or someone's out there, he's coming to do something that's against me. It comes from a lack of humility. Additionally, when it comes to a lack of humility, even in your Torah study, you might come to conclusions that are not true. So you might be turning to positive sources, but you're taking them and you're filtering them through yourself, and the way it might distort the answer. So you might think you're doing the thing that is halachically correct. You might think you're doing the thing that is in line with Torah and in line with godliness, and in truth, you're actually doing something that negates godliness. And that's what I meant when we said Ein by Mayim, and that automatically we have the snakes and scorpions negativity in there. Automatically, when you don't have humility, automatically it results in negative things coming into the picture. Even when you're engaging in something positive, if you don't have that bittul, if you don't have that humility, there's going to be negative things that come into the picture to distort the truth. And now we're going to connect this back to Hanukkah, right? We said that this whole concept is discussed in the Sugya of Hanukkah, and also Hanukkah is starting tomorrow. We're reading the Parsha on Hanukkah. So Chassidus really discusses this idea. What was it that the Yevanim wanted? What was it that the Greeks wanted? The Greeks were extremely cultured people. And especially during that time, they were different from other cultures in that they actually adopted things from many cultures. They adopted, Alexander the Great went out, conquered the world, and they didn't negate everyone's culture. They opened up and they took all the things that they saw that were good from other cultures. And so it's a strange thing that all of a sudden they're coming to Israel and saying, no, you're not allowed to learn Torah. Why should they care? If they're open-minded, if you could say it was a liberal movement, the Greek movement. It was an open-minded, non-reactionary movement. So how come they're cracking down on Torah study? How come they're cracking down on Jewish practice? And the answer is that what the Greeks were against and what they couldn't handle was this element of Torah secha, the element of that Torah comes from God. And when Torah comes from God, that means that sometimes I'm going to have to do things that don't really make any sense. Things that are not logical and rational in our minds, right? The Greeks were big philosophers. They were trying to rationalize things, even though, of course, many years later, we see how their philosophy was maybe not as rational as they thought it was. As we see with all philosophy, as time evolves, it changes. And why is it that it changes? If we think we're coming from such an intellectual, rational place, why is it that it's proven to be untrue? Even their science that was studied and they, was considered to be the highest at the time is completely nowadays it's completely debunked. So why is it that the rational always changes? It's because at the end of the day, there is no ultimate rational truth. Rationalizations are always going to be evolving and changing. And the biggest proof to that is just history. If you look at history, you see that the truths, the facts of 2,000 years ago are not the facts of today. And you say, oh, but those are facts. But apparently, there's still wiggle room in the facts. There's still space for them to change. And this happens to all rational thought. Because truth does not lie in rational thought. However much we maybe are naturally drawn to thinking that, truth actually lies in only one place. Truth lies in Hashem. Hashem is not rational. Hashem could present himself in a way that a rational-minded person can understand, but Hashem is not rational. Hashem is super rational. Hashem is beyond rational. And it was that connection to God that drove the Greeks crazy. That is not rational. Bris Milah. How does Bris Milah make sense? What does this God want you doing this crazy thing for? Doesn't make any sense. So we're going to ban that. The things that don't make sense are going to drive us crazy. So if you want to sit and learn Torah as some sort of intellectual endeavor of studying a culture or studying some sort of, sociology or whatever you want to, theology, and you want to use that to study Torah from that frame of reference, which, if you would go to a university today, you could study Torah that way also, right? You can look at it from a purely theological sense or sociological sense or whatever it is, a historical lens, and you can completely remove it from its godliness and approach it just as a study. And that means that there is no humility involved in that. You come in with your knowledge and your facts, and you're going to take this and fit it in to wherever it fits in within your worldview. But that is not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is that we want to connect to Hashem through Torah. That's our goal, is that through our study, we're connecting to something that is beyond us. And if something doesn't make sense, we don't say this thing is not true. We say, I just don't understand yet. That's the difference. So automatically, if you're coming from that selfish worldview, or from, from that point of view, you encounter something and it doesn't make sense to your mind, you say it doesn't make sense, it must not be true. I don't understand it, it must not be true. Versus when you're coming from an approach of humility, you don't understand it, this is just an indication, or something's bothering you. What is it? It's an indication that I need to explore this more. So maybe it's an indication that I need to refine myself a little bit more so that my brain is ready to understand this because I've gone through maybe more of a process of refinement. So maybe it's not even related so much to this information. Maybe it's related to something else in my practice that needs to go through a bittul process in order for me to be able to understand this and grasp this. That's why it says in Al Hanisim on Hanukkah, we say, when the Greeks came up against us, Alam Yisrael, against the nation of Israel, lahashkicham terasecha, that we should forget our Torah, your Torah. Sorry, that we should forget your Torah. And we have both of these concepts that we mentioned previously. First of all, this concept of your Torah, the Torah that is connected to God, not Torah removed from God as an intellectual study, and also this concept of forgetting. That when you approach it without bittul, if you just say it in your mind, if it's purely an intellectual thing, then what's going to happen? You're going to forget it. It's only when you have the humility that you're going to be able to cement it in your heart in a strong way. So that was the goal of the Greeks. So I think as we're going into Hanukkah, we can take this as, and just one more point aside from this also, connecting. What did they do to all the oil in the Beis HaMikdash? They specifically went and made the oil coming. Why everything else? They just broke all the seals of the oil, right? Why the oil? Why not do something else? I mean, they defiled the whole Beis HaMikdash, but what is this emphasis on the oil? Is that oil represents chachma. That's what we always talk about in Hasidus, is that Kabbalah is that oil is chachma. Chachma is the process, the part in our learning process where we have this bittul. Chachma is that initial spark. In order to be able to receive this initial spark, you need to let go of yourself. And then in Bina, you have to let go to be able to receive the idea. Then in Bina, you reintroduce your own thoughts and try to see how we can make this fit into everything else that I know. But in the Chachma moment, Chachma is bittul. Chachma is kayach ma. The power of what? The power of curiosity. The power of letting go of yourself. So they want to destroy all the oil. And so what do we do on Hanukkah to counter that is we light up our Hanukkah menorahs with oil. And the whole purpose of that is not only that it should be an influence for ourselves, but the purpose of Hanukkah is to be able to influence that on the entire world. And I think now more than ever, we can sense the necessity for the whole world needing to receive a dose of chachma, needing to receive a dose of truth as it is in a pure state, not as it is in a convoluted ego state. And so on Hanukkah, how do we accomplish that? You can't force people to open themselves up. But the more that we open ourselves up, the more we bring the power of truth into the world. So I think our focus is on ourselves. How can I increase in my openness and my curiosity and my wonder about Hashem? How can I let go of myself a little bit more and let godliness come into my life? And automatically when we do that, when we light our own oil, it influences the whole world around us. So we should be able to accomplish that this year. Amen. Add a lot of light.